Next, Scott Edgertoft, 261 North Main Street.
Good evening, I'm Rick Stott, architect for Scott Tegethoff. He's not able to make it today. I'd just like to review quickly what the scope of the proposal.
Just have, yeah.
Yep. I think I had a better drawing here.
Are these the same plans you presented before?
These are, yes, but I have new ones to show you. I have another drawing that has the areas dotted in, but there's two areas that we're requesting in this application. One for a 3-foot extension to an existing front porch, or an existing porch, I should say, at 261 North Main Street. And then that's on the east side. On the west side, an extension of a roof, simply extruding an existing roof for an overhang out about 7 feet, and filling in an open corner of late 80s, early 90s addition, and making a new front entry in that area, changing 3 or 4 windows on the Skinner Street side, and that's it.
You want to show us the windows that are changing?
I will. There were some comments made last week that I didn't understand, so I'd like to start with a conversation about the front porch.
What would you like to ask?
I would like to ask Zach Studenroth what he meant when he said that if by extending the roof out, if it went any farther, he was worried that someone would hit their head. So I was hoping to get some clarification on
Fine.
that.
I'd be happy to clarify that, but that is incidental to the design issue. So I'm not representing
Right,
the
this
health and
seems a
safety
little
of your visitors.
Sorry.
So that was purely a practical observation.
I just don't understand.
Fine.
It doesn't really make sense to me, so
Fine. Well,
if
let
I
me-
put a drawing of the porch, could you explain what you meant by that?
Well, really, I don't know if this is
The essence of my
necessary.
observation was that the porch, which appears to be largely intact, or certainly representative of the architecture of this house,
Here's a little section drawing.
yeah, is the proportion that it is. It's appropriate to the building. And your proposed addition of 3 feet to it is not an appropriate design for that house, for its period.
I heard you say it would destroy the historical character of Southampton Village. Is that right?
I don't
I'd
like
be
how
willing
this-
to restate that, sure, but what word are we parsing here?
What-
You're not comfortable with?
What I heard Zach say, by the way, is that you're... it's
Mr.
a-
Stotts, this is not, I'm not comfortable with how this is going. You need to address us, not Mr. Studenroth. If you have a question, please direct it to the board.
Okay, I have another question. At the end of the meeting, Mr. Coburn said that the historical guide, that he thought that every architect should have these historical guidelines on their
Oh,
desk.
these historical guidelines.
I think it's the same ones,
Oh.
printed off, yep.
These are excerpts. I don't have the whole book with me.
Fine.
But I can assure you, I do and have one on my desktop in electronic form, and I have one in my office also. I've been referring to it for a long time, and the way I see this is these guidelines were written for people who live in historic districts that want to make changes to their house so that they're done in a sensitive and thoughtful way. Right? Am I right? So when my clients asked me about making an addition to this porch, the first thing I thought of was these guidelines. And what I thought of was that the front porch, which was really important and significant 140 years ago, has become functionally impractical. Because in the 80s, an addition was added to the house that's, I guess one could say, is not sensitive at all to these historical guidelines. And they moved the front door from North Main Street to Skinner
Just for the
Street.
record, the guidelines only came out in 2002 or so, so that change would have
2000.
happened 20 years before the guidelines were available.
Exactly right.
So in retrospect, they were insensitive to those guidelines. Sorry,
That's
just
of
wanted
course
to clarify.
exactly right. All right? So I'm a little bit stuck because there's something that was important at one time as a front porch, used as a functional front porch, that doesn't function that way anymore. And my client feels that it's impractical, functionally obsolete. So he has the right to ask to make it a little bit larger. So after last week, I knew I wasn't going to win that argument, the way it sat. So I asked Scott if it would be all right if I went around the village and looked for other porches for comparison, which I did. So I have a few pages of other porches in the North Historic District of Southampton Village, and they're not labeled with addresses. Unfortunately, I got pretty constrained with time. But you can see easily that many of these porches are at least 8 feet big. Some of them are on newer construction, some of them are on period houses, but each one of them has a different character. Some have hip roofs, some have but steeply pitched roofs so that you can see that material. Others have very shallow pitches on them. This one has a deck on top. It's a different style, obviously, but many of them were the very same style. There's one, I think the number is 110 North Main Street. This house is a very, very similar house to Mr. Tegethoff's house in character and size. The front porch is very, very similar to his. It has columns and balustrades. It has one small set of steps, this one on the front side. Mr. Tegethoff's steps are on the side. When he asked me for the wraparound steps, by the way, I knew that wasn't going to fly. And also, when he asked me for the dark colored stain, I knew that wouldn't fly, but he asked me to ask, so I did. What I didn't expect, though, is when we offered to rebuild this deck 3 feet larger with all the same elements, the same posts, the same balusters, eliminate the steps, recreate the same roof. The pitch would have to change a little bit, but the fact that you can't see it from the street wouldn't change. It's still a very flat pitched roof that you can't see from the street. So I was surprised that you guys said no, no way, because that 3-foot extension does work with this. I am keeping with the scale and the proportion and the materials and those things that are outlined in this guideline. There's another very flat roof.
These are all the whole point of the historic houses is their individuality, as far as I can tell.
Exactly. I
So
agree.
why are we having apples and oranges going on here?
I'm just saying
Different
that,
times, different,
that
this is
the
a north,
property owners have a right to expand their property to meet current standards, and he
what
asked me to do that
standards
in a
are we
sensitive way, and I
discussing?
think
The
this is done
standards
in a
are that we
sensitive way.
preserve history. That's my job, our job.
To keep people from improving their homes?
I'm not, well, that's your take on it, and I really don't like that, but that's fine, go ahead.
That's how he feels.
That's fine, he should come here and tell us. But
He is,
let's-
through me.
Okay,
Yeah, just the tone, the
It's
mannerism, and the directiveness is really not
Grating.
productive, and is turning negative quick.
Don't mean to be negative. Mr. Tagathoff has an opinion. He can't make it tonight. He's asked me to express it to you.
fine.
I'd like to show you the elevations for comparison. The front elevation is exactly the same with this proposed application as the existing. See the difference. So it wouldn't look the same from the front. Of course, you can't see an elevation because they're 2D and not in 3D. But the front elevation is exactly the same. Same materials, same colors, same finishes, same proportions, same scale. Okay? The north elevation is a little bit different. Here's the existing one. There's an existing privacy screen on it that's 4 feet wide. It's actually a 4x8 piece of screening. This one would be 7 feet wide. The 3 feet is in there. Now, again, there's lots of examples in the village of porches that are 8 feet long and
We're
8
not
feet wide.
talking about the other houses in the village. This is a tiny little house in the North Main Street Historic District. So that your argument to me, really, and the fact that you, quote, can't see it, that's the trees
I
that
never
your
said you
client
couldn't
had put
see it.
up. But please understand, we are tasked with trying to preserve the historic nature of this village, porch or no porch. So adding
Back to
3
the
feet to
guidelines.
4 feet is almost doubling the length, yes?
What is-
Could you be specific? I'm just curious, because the guidelines are not the code, but they are there to help people to, understand what's required in the code. I'm just curious where you found in the guidelines that suggests that you can replace the porch on a Victorian house with one which is about a third as big as the one that's there.
It's about a
and
third
that's
as-
recognized as a way of preserving the architecture of the building. That's like changing the roof line from a gable to a gambrel because your client wants more headroom. Perhaps it's not the right house for this particular owner, but preserving that house is not about changing these features to enable a contemporary lifestyle. That's not in the code, and that's not in the guidelines. So, nor can you reasonably take houses of different periods, different architectural styles, different scales, different sizes, different neighborhoods, and say they all have porches of different sizes, and therefore this is the size we want. I don't really understand that as an approach. We're talking about, and I believe we mentioned this before, is this porch original to the house? Is it historic? If you come in with forensic evidence that says, in fact, I believe this porch was rebuilt in the
It's not.
1950s, and the original was something else, then that's something we could talk about. We're presuming, because it appears to have historical basis, and it's the one we know has been there as long as it's been documented, so that's what we're working with. And it is scaled appropriately to that period. So beyond that, wanting something larger is not preserving the house.
I'll show you one more picture before I move on. These are before and after examples of the porch, between what's existing and what's proposed, suggesting that most people would be very hard-pressed to notice the difference of what was there before versus what we're proposing. And to me, allowing an owner to improve their property, to make it work, while doing it in what I think is a sensitive way, maybe not everyone agrees with me, but I think that's what these guidelines were for, and I think this board should approve it based on that.
I just go back, I don't want to challenge you, but I do have two questions. Because in addition to the guidelines, by the way, the code does ask us to consider the Department of Interior standards on preservation. And the Department of Interior standards is pretty clear about saying that you shouldn't take something down that's extant unless it's necessary, and it doesn't refer to function or current taste. And that if you do and you're looking to recreate it, it should essentially be recreated in the same dimensions and with the same materials. So that is something it's not a requirement, but it's a consideration. It's not something we must apply, but we must consider it in an application like this. And I'm just curious as to what in those guidelines you think says that there should be flexibility to allow a change of dimensions or architectural features for sort of comfort or modern living. I don't see it in there, but.
My
you may know those-
interpretation of this is that they're not trying to dictate style or size, and that they're more concerned in these guidelines with scale and
Well,
proportion.
just remember those guidelines, sorry to interrupt, go ahead. Yep.
And to me, the scale and proportion of the proposed versus the existing are not great enough to disallow an owner from improving his property in a way that would make his lifestyle.
Keep in mind, those guidelines, in terms of not addressing scale and proportion, I believe one of the reasons they don't is those guidelines were intended to guide new construction in the historic district as well. And so it doesn't divide out strict preservation from sort of style and stylistic guidelines for new construction or additions. So some of the reason why you don't see some of the dimensional definitions or detail that you might otherwise expect from a preservation document is that that document's not aimed just at preservation. So I'm not sure I see any basis for saying when you're preserving something that it's okay or kind of okay to change the dimension of existing historic architectural feature.
The guidelines make a distinction between preservation and renovation.
Mr. Stott, can I just interrupt you for a second? You refer to the guidelines, but I think it'd be helpful, because I know the board members all have a copy, I have a copy here. What pages are you referring to?
Okay.
I know there's a section specifically on porches, pages 50 and 51. Are you referring to those guidelines?
Not exactly, no.
And I had brought them up in the last meeting because
In fact,
there's one...
there's 10 recommendations of what guidelines for things to avoid when you're dealing with porches. But it also goes on and it says, the decision on how and to what extent to rehabilitate a porch can test the mettle of even the most devoted preservationists. In the end, decisions of rehabilitation, removal, or addition of a porch should be based on careful historic research, a determination of the house's dominant architectural style and how the porch contributes or detracts from this style, an examination of what is common in the surrounding neighborhood and the porch's structural condition. There is one of the conditions, it says replacing an entire porch. You should avoid replacing an entire porch unless it is too deteriorated to repair or building a new porch if it is missing completely. The new porch should match the original as closely as possible in materials, size, and detail. And there's other there, but I'm just wondering what guidelines, this is very specific about porches.
There are other sections of these recommendations that I refer to as well. For example, on page 4, additions to historic structures should be harmonious and characteristic, massing architectural features of that structure, of the characteristic structures of its immediate environs, and shall not destroy the main character defining elements of the structure. Any addition should be clearly distinguishable from the historic or fabric and should be reversible.
But this isn't an addition, this is the porch. It's already there.
I agree, it's not an addition.
I think
It's an expansion of the porch.
parts 50 and 51 make it very plain.
Well, I don't want to beat a dead horse. So,
Okay.
if we were to omit the front, or the porch section of this application, I'd like to continue with the additions to the western
I
side.
don't think anyone, did anyone object to it? No one
I
did.
just wanted to see the detail, I wanted to see side-by-side
It's-
elevations, I think I asked in the last meeting, of existing versus
I thought there
proposed.
was
And
I think I just showed you that, no? They are.
I haven't seen them. You're handing us something new tonight? Is this?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't get those to you.
Yep. So I've not seen it.
Yeah, that's not very good.
Oh, it's way down the driveway. Thank you. Really good. Well, these are the porches.
Zach, you need
I don't know
to
what, is it next door?
Yeah, I can.
So we're looking at sheet A001?
Yep. P or A?
A.
A.
So,
Oh, that's the elevations that Mr. Coburn wanted to compare.
Yeah, thank you.
okay, I'm just trying to, so existing is
Existing's
To the
on
left,
to the
the,
left
on the left
in
side.
each case, and the proposed is to
So
the
it's on
right.
the right, that's correct.
Okay.
And just to be clear, since I've not seen this side of the property, but on the south facade right now, is it on that sort of 1.5-story or maybe even single-story addition on the back, is that currently clapboard or siding?
The south addition is shingles that were painted. The rest of the shingles on the house are natural cedar
I
shingles
see.
that are sort of standard exposure, like 7 inches probably, but they're face nailed with stainless steel nails in each one. I've never seen that before.
Every course?
Every course, every shingle has 2 stainless steel nails right in the face of it. I don't know when it was done or why it was done. I've never seen especially that kind of shingle applied that way, but that's what they've got there. And it's one of the reasons he asked me to stain it, because that bothered him too.
So if I'm reading this to be the north facade correctly, you're proposing changing the 2 windows on the second story?
No, I'm sorry, those are
One?
the same.
That's the south.
But
I'm
No.
looking at the, I
Oh.
believe this is the north facing,
The second
Well, it
row
says
from the
south.
bottom?
Okay.
I'm sorry,
South.
it says
not labeled.
south,
Can you read
but I think this is
It
north.
says south elevation above
Yeah,
them.
south.
It's the south elevation.
Yeah.
yeah,
It is.
Yeah.
Right.
So the 2 windows above the,
Turn around.
that little
My
bay,
apologies.
Right.
Yes, I've turned around. Yeah, that's the south facade.
So
But
you
you're saying
read-
that's not happening.
no,
So those 2 existing windows would remain.
correct. The windows we're changing are all on the first floor.
And what about the 6/1s that are upstairs in that back extension?
They're existing and will remain.
So they're not going to 2/2?
No. Actually, they all, no, that's what they're, I think that's a mistake. Those are not 6/1 windows.
Okay.
Those 2 windows in the middle of the south facade are just remaining the same, to your knowledge, or?
These two?
Yeah.
Yes,
And the upstairs?
Yes.
Yeah.
yes, they're not changing.
I was interested, just because it's behind I know it's behind some plantings, but it's right by the road. I was interested in particular looking at the windows on the north facade. If I'm seeing in the middle there, you're realigning those paired windows so that they sit over each other, roughly? No, in the middle in the 2-story nope. So go back, yeah. Those
These,
2, yeah. Are those getting realigned?
no,
Okay,
they're existing and remaining.
okay. Something's changed on here.
no, it's,
You know what's changed is the distance between them. I think the lower windows,
Yeah, well, what is the
the-
line?
is that a band, what is
Yeah,
that, a
what is that
mid-band?
line that separates?
that doesn't belong there. That's a computer glitch.
Okay. But is the roof line going up on that middle section slightly? That's what it appears from this.
This section here,
Yes.
Yeah.
this is existing and it's a flat roof.
Yep. So you're
Um,
changing the pitch
You're
to
getting
drain it better.
Yes, completely existing. The ceiling is even pitched a bit, and the western portion of that flat roof is about 6 foot 1/2 inch from floor to ceiling.
So the proposal is
It's
to
right there.
elevate the pitch of that roof?
No, there's no change to the perimeter of the house, with the exception of that one little piece of the corner of the front entry.
I would only recommend that the drawings should show that because.
It's, I'm actually sitting here counting. It's like 4 deviations from what is printed to what you're saying is being done, which kind of confuses our reading of the plans.
It just seems really clear that that aspect of that back roof scales above,
You can see it.
not below, and
Right.
there's obviously a greater distance
If
between
under-
the
Yeah, there is a
windows there.
different distance between there, but none of that's changing. I'm not touching any of it.
But all I'm saying is that the proposed drawings show this condition. which isn't the same as that, and therefore there's a little bit of confusion.
I
as to
understand.
what's going
I
on.
will be sure that
Yeah.
that's
Okay.
coordinated.
The
and-
window is going up, though. It is the window that,
No, this isn't
No.
changing.
No.
Saying it's not changing.
What's,
What I'm adding, I'm changing the windows on the north side. Let's look at this
All the way at the
drawing.
back?
Yeah,
you allow that to happen.
this on the northwest side, so the north facade, the far right side to you guys. So that roof is extending out 7 feet. I'm changing a funky awning Anderson window to these 3,
okay.
2.5 by 2.5. I'm changing this window, and I'm changing,
Is this on the big plans that you submitted?
yes.
Where are the big plans? Isn't it
The chimney, is that changing?
It's not new, is
Is the chimney
it?
changing
Nothing's
as
changed
well?
in this since last time, right?
No, we're
Where are the
discussing the
original-
western portion.
Where is this? Here, this is what we're looking for, the plans. Let's do it on the real plans, that way maybe we can get somewhere. It's taking a long time to get nowhere.
And I guess the present chimney is
This is the,
proposed with shingle.
Yeah, it's like that already. There's another small chimney in the living room that was not original to the house, but part of the addition that we'd like to remove. In the original set, there were 2 pages of colored drawings. 2 elevation pages, A201.
Well, just there for a sample. The window that you say is increasing in the middle of the building, the building itself, you said it wasn't shifting, it was just going up. So you've realigned that to balance the one below it?
No, there are existing windows that are not changing.
They're not going up.
No.
so is my understanding that only in the very back part, is that what you're changing? What
I'm
page?
changing these 3 windows. I'm adding this roof overhang over a new
Right.
entry door. I'm changing this window, 1 window adjacent to this one, and I'm adding 2 windows on the south side of the entry and a patio door on the south side. And that's all.
Question that I was asking for the elevations, and I appreciate them, was to understand the windows, particularly on the north facade, on the western half. I like that there were some sort of, it's the wrong word, but there were some random windows that were there before put onto that addition. This seems to be, to me, a nice treatment, which is to have a different window that's on the main house, something that's appropriate to the scale and the height of that extension on the back. So I appreciate seeing them, and that answers my question on them. I don't have any further questions.
Any other questions about the addition to the west?
So where are we?
Search me, I don't know. Are there
I'd like to
actual-
request a motion to approve the additions to the west and omit anything to do with the eastern porch.
Sounds good.
Well, it wouldn't be a motion to
And-
approve, it would be a motion for written decision,
Exactly.
and it will be drafted in a written decision as the omission to be.
And I think there was a request for a color change also, which we would omit.
Right, so
Okay.
only,
So what are you doing with the porch application?
We're
Asking the board to
throwing it out.
reconsider it or continue
No.
the consideration, or you're withdrawing that?
We're withdrawing the porch.
Effectively, it sounds like withdrawing that portion of the
so
application.
only the
That's what I want to get on the
western-
record, that it's withdrawn.
Right. So it's filling in that corner and the
on
southwest
that-
corner?
Yeah,
and extending the roof over that
Correct.
to incorporate that as interior space.
Right?
And then extending the shed roof on the back 7 feet out.
It's not a shed roof, it's a low-pitched
Sorry,
gable.
that's right, it's the gable, sorry,
Okay.
extending the gable shed about 7 feet out on the western side.
That's correct.
So you're looking for those approvals?
Yes, sir.
So there's no change to the porch or the color,
No
correct?
change to the
point.
porch.
And
no
all changes
change
are
to
on the
existing
western.
color of the house.
So
So I
Or
think
to the
you're gonna need new
windows.
plans. So I think this is gonna be
It's
like
gonna be
the
similar,
last
like,
written
well,
decision.
are there any public comments on this? Okay. So I will make a motion that we close this file for written decision by council, covering plans to be resubmitted in a timely fashion the next week or two or so. Is that reasonable?
That's absolutely reasonable.
That are similar to these plans, but omit any changes to the porch, omit any changes in color. I think that's it.
And the fenestration of the main house.
I'm sorry?
The fenestration of the original house, because there are discrepancies.
Remains the
in
same.
these drawings between.
So fenestration for the existing house.
I'll correct those discrepancies of the existing fenestration.
Okay.
Second.
Aye.
Sounds good.
Aye.
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 Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, Christopher Moore, 509 First Neck Lane, construct accessory pool house. Thank you. Got down to 0 here.
Melissa Dedovich, Peconic Environmental Associates. I'm here on behalf of Mr. Moore. I'm here with the project architect, Marcela Sotile. Sotile. I never can get that right, but. It's a 234-foot pool house on a 2-acre lot with a flagpole of 515 feet to the closest street. We can go through the plans.
Material.
Material.
Exists the same as the house. So
Cedar.
we had been here a few months ago to present an addition to the existing house, which was approved. The pool house is going to be located to the north of the back of the house, and it's going to be the same shingle
Why
cedar
don't you
material. Yeah.
show the elevation?
And there was also something about the deck.
Just extending that, was a deck approval, and then there's a couple stairs up to the pool house to address the FEMA.
Oh, okay, that part I was confused.
There you go. Okay, so this is the way that the pool is gonna look like, the house pool is gonna look like. So we are keeping with the same material of the existing and the proposed addition, same colors, same style. This is it,
Okay,
same height.
Can I just ask you on the south elevation,
Yep.
is that a scalloped sort of frieze board or fascia board underneath or just underneath the
Here?
eave line? Underneath the eave line of the roof.
This
Scalloped board?
is it was supposed to be a space for an awning, but but we're not gonna do it.
Oh, I see, okay,
We're not
sorry.
gonna do it. It was just a
Okay,
That's
hole.
not structural, that's cloth.
Correct.
Got it.
It would have been cloth, but the owner doesn't want it.
thank you.
anyone from the public have anything to say about this pool house that you can't see from the road?
Did you wait 2 hours for
Yeah. Motion to approve the application.
written
I
decision?
make a motion to close for written decision,
Yes, yes.
the application of Christopher Moore, 509 First Neck Lane.
So moved.
Second, aye.
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 And that's how you do
This
it.
should have been, this should have been moved up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Maybe we should
By the way-
have Strava gates at pool
I'm
houses.
going to keep 2 of these, but do you want those back for any? You're just going to.
Next,
Good luck.
Castile
Thank
Hall
you.
Partners LLC, 139 South Main Street. Construct 2-story, single-family dwelling. Please state your name.
For the applicant, John David Rose, architect, located at 596 Hampton Road. Affidavits of mailing and affidavits of posting. I have several sets of reduced drawings.
Fine.
How many would you like? Everyone want one? I have plenty. hard on these.
Did you? What, to see if there were reasons? What, more?
We're missing one.
Sorry.
Thanks. Do you want it?
Sorry about that.
Zach have one?
Yes, I do, thank
He
you.
does. So, could you just briefly go over it
I will.
since?
I'll make it quick.
I don't think, yeah.
It's in the historic district, but as you probably remember, we have a certificate of appropriateness
You
for the
can't see
demolition.
it from anywhere, that's what I remember.
Okay, that was my last line. You can't see it from anywhere.
You can't, can you? I tried, when they were
I
gonna
assume
knock.
some neighbors can, but
no,
no, you
but I
can't see
mean,
from Lake Agawam, you
no,
can't see.
that's what I mean.
Correct. And we've tried very hard to make it
Modest,
materials, of course. Cedar shingle, cedar on the roof,
I love how modest.
6/1 windows, brick chimney. The entire house is 2,832 square feet.
Fabulous.
I don't like it, John.
No dog and pony show tonight?
No.
We don't want
Actually,
to disrespect you, but I
Zach,
think
do you have anything to say? I think we should just move ahead then.
I always take notes as I do my readings, and I
Yeah.
wrote perfect.
The materials,
Only time I ever say that on an application, I think it's
me
gorgeous.
too, and it's in a really good place. I know. Could you just tell us the materials so we have it on the
Yes.
record?
Cedar shingles on the roof, cedar siding, white trim, brick chimneys.
Copper brick.
Mahogany trim, right, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's mahogany painted white. It just lasts longer.
Real, full masonry chimney? Any comments or questions from the public?
We only got the,
Better not.
No.
Just out of curiosity, the gutters I see, are they copper?
Lead coated, copper gutters, sorry, copper gutters and leaders.
Sweet.
So I
All right.
jumped around and went,
all right, we're
Can
done.
we
Okay.
put this in the next update of the architectural guidelines?
I wish you would.
Yes. The motion to close
do it right.
the application of Passfield Hall Partners for written decision.
So moved by council. So moved.
Aye.
Second, someone?
Second.
Second.
Aye.
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 Goodbye.
Thank you. Good thing you sat through all that other stuff.
Good luck.
So then, at the next meeting,
Is this it?
Why'd you drag that one out, John?
Yeah, and that next meeting is the 29th of October.
But you know what?
28.
Call ahead. You know what? There's no reason to come to the meeting. It's just in the building
want to
department.
give all this up?
No, come on. But there's pretty many of these, so you might want to check. But there's not a whole lot to say. I mean, it's a descriptive thing. Okay?
Someone want to give me extra copies back?
No, I'm keeping this one.
He's going to copy it.
Oh, okay.
Next,
We got copyright laws, buddy.
I didn't say I was copying anything.
Emanon South Corporation, 276 North Main Street. Construct two-story, single-family dwelling with detached garage. Your name, please?
Michael White. I'm proposing a kind of a transitional white farmhouse with a metal roof, stucco, no soffits on the house.
I have a picture of it.
Put something
Oh,
on the
okay.
desk and turn it
Sure.
upside down for the
Like
camera,
this?
please. Yeah.
And actually, I'll take this. It has black windows. It's part of a subdivision. I did a minor subdivision. They're 1 acre lots. We built one house. It's a shingle style, center hall colonial. When we did this, we were entitled to 9 lots. We did 3 lots, and when we were in the planning board, we told them that we were going to build 3 white farmhouses, and we we're going to put privets in the front, which we did already. The house to the south is screened. And that's basically it. And we're 80 foot from the street. And we're 31.9 feet when we're entitled to 35 feet high.
How far back is the house next door, just out of curiosity? It's not, this house is further back, right?
Yeah, I think it's 65 feet, 60, I think the minimum
Another
60.
15 feet.
Yeah.
or so further.
Yeah, because the lot gets wider, so to fit the house, I had to go back a little bit more. Any questions?
Well, I don't actually see this in any way in terms of the metal roof and the stucco as being anything like a farmhouse in the North Main Street Historic District. There's no stucco houses. There's no metal roofs.
There's, the ambulance you're building now has a metal roof that you approved, and it's white.
We didn't approve it. It's not in we're in the North Main Street Historic District, which has shingled houses, including the one we were just talking about with the porch. And I don't honestly think there are 2, 3, or 4 stucco houses on Herrick Road that were a certain period. But that's a different area. This is a historic district of old farmhouses.
There were 7 structures on that lot, and some of them were stucco before they fell down.
Well,
From the 1800s. So that's not true, and there were metal roofs on them. And if you go through the
I'm sorry, unless you can bring me, I don't know what we're talking about here.
that lot was a 3-acre lot, which was part of an 11-acre. That was all farm that belonged to one person. There were 9 structures on the 3-acre lot. Some of the structures were white, rough stuccoed barns, houses. There was one house that was rebuilt that I tore down. It was from 1940. That it was a kit house that Zach inspected, and there were metal roofs on those farm buildings. And there were many farm buildings that were torn down in the village that had metal roofs. On Pulaski Street, that was a potato farm. There were houses there that had metal roofs. If you go in the historic section of Gin Lane, a lot of mansions that burnt down were stucco, were white stucco homes. And they even had clay roofs and metal roofs. And
I only know of one that's a modern house with a metal roof, but we're not on Gin Lane.
well, you're in the
north.
historic section. And if you
There are
want to,
different sections that have separate characteristics, this being the North Main Street.
well, it's the worst entrance to the village by far. And
We need to talk about your house, not about what...
well, I'm trying to improve it. That's what I'm doing. That's why I bought that lot.
There's nothing there to improve, everything you demolished, right? There's one house you built.
Well, he's trying to improve the road, the entrance. But I agree, we're not,
We're not in the improvement,
But-
we're into the historic.
But I will
Please
give
don't.
Michael credit for the house that he built. And that's for the same reason I give him credit for the house that he built. I find it difficult to approve this house, which you described as a transitional house. And that street is a gateway to the community, whether you think it's the best, the worst, or not, that's irrelevant, and I have a different opinion than you do. I think it's a significant entrance to the city, to the village, and there are historic houses on there that are being preserved. So I
That are
think,
falling down,
I think
actually.
that may well be. There's a place for this house, but not on that street. I would much prefer, Michael, that you did something that was more akin to the very successful house that you already have built, and with more traditional Southampton materials, a more traditional Southampton look, maybe something that's more reminiscent of the farms that it once was, and some of the statements you made in terms of stucco buildings and metal roofs, most of the reference, at least I heard, that you're making had to do with outbuildings. And yes, it wasn't uncommon for barns to be made of stucco because it was cheap. You mix some sand and you mix some cement and you slap it on there. But they weren't using that as main houses to historic district. Village into the town. Maybe some beach houses along Gin Lane might have had stucco. And then as far as the metal roofs, most of those were used on outbuildings as well. So I know you're capable of a more traditional house. and I would much prefer to see that.
Let me ask you a question. You approved houses at the beginning of the street, okay? That little subdivision of 4 lots, those are all postmoderns, okay? They've never built a house like that until the 90s. So
What subdivision?
the first subdivision
that,
where you, when you pull down
Appley built?
North Main on the right-hand side, there's a little.
On the west side.
Right.
just
Allen
under the
Court?
highway.
Right. Allen Court. They're all postmodern. They never made
They're
a
not
post.
on the street.
What's the difference?
A huge difference.
Well, you can see them from the road. I mean, why,
You
then
can't
why?
really see them, and
You
there
can
there
sort of
was,
see
Sure you
one-
can see them. You can see all 3 of them.
You can sort of see one of them. They don't
they're
face the
not
road in the
stucco,
same
and they
way.
don't have metal roofs.
So,
But they have a architecture that's postmodern that never existed, okay?
I
That's
don't
a-
honestly think I remember them vaguely, but they have a fairly traditional feel in terms of the
Because
materials.
of shingles?
And they don't front on the street.
Yeah,
So
the fronting
North
on the
Main
street. The
District-
guy with the porch who we were just having the tussle with,
Yeah.
he fronts on the street.
So then why would you ever have the last application with a pool house you can't even see from any street or anybody's neighborhood? Why would you even have that come in here then if that's
It's
the point?
required by the
has to.
law.
Okay, so that's what I'm saying.
You are required by the law, too, and we're
Okay,
telling you.
and you're required
that
to-
you're proposing a house that we feel is incompatible
Okay,
with the
based on what?
surroundings.
That's being arbitrary and capricious.
Fine.
So what
that-
I'm
You know,
starting to
it's
say-
based
We're not
on,
being
it's
arbitrary.
judgment,
Don't
Michael.
argue with him, it's just not worth it.
Michael,
Okay,
you know the code, and the use of those words don't apply here.
they don't?
No.
I went to the Supreme
Michael,
Court and I
I'm
won,
speaking, so
okay?
listen to me.
I think we
You're
should
not
close
listening.
the
No.
hearing.
Listen.
When I
stop talking.
speak, you listen,
No, I'll
and I will listen when you speak.
Okay.
The words you used, arbitrary and capricious, you can choose to use that in an Article 78 if you feel that we've done that. The code says that we can use our judgment. So what may seem arbitrary to you is our judgment, and that's where we differ.
Well, I went to Supreme Court 2 years ago, and you could ask Bo Robinson what happened. They said you're arbitrary and capricious, and they said if it's not in the law, okay, having guidelines means nothing to
Okay,
a
well,
court.
threatening
okay?
us isn't
And
really
having-
productive.
And having something, what you did to me on Woolley Street, by where it's in the code, I was allowed 25 feet from the street, and you wanted it 30, that was
We gotta stop
arbitrary,
this.
and it was
I'd like
ruled
to-
arbitrary.
I'm going to close this.
I'd like to comment on this application.
Right, which
if
is
I
what,
could.
right.
And
I
if we
just wanted to-
continue with this line of argument, I'm going to close the hearing
Okay.
and adjourn it until next time.
I think what you need to do is ask the applicant to show how he's meeting the standards, go one by
That's
one
correct.
by the standards, Mr. White. And also, I'd ask you to address the guidelines and tell us how your proposed building complies with those standards in the code and the guidelines, which is the duty of this board.
Okay, if I
It's your
change,
burden to prove.
if I changed the siding and the roof to shingles, would that be acceptable?
We'd have to,
Let me, if I could, let me make some other comments. And you did describe this as transitional, but also farmhouse feel. So here's, I don't mind, for one, I don't mind the stucco. I'm not sure I see it here on North Main Street. On the other hand, I see it elsewhere in the village. There's some on Cameron, and Herrick has been discussed. So the stucco doesn't bother me per se. But, you know, the 45-degree angle on the gables bothers me. It gives that sort of chateau and more urban feel. The metal roof bothers me. The slab awnings hung by cables are a very modern touch. I don't see any precedent for that anywhere in the village. And the railing used on the porches and around the stairwells, from what I can see, has a modern feel as well. So my concern is that I'm not seeing the materials and the forms and some of the angles that would be typical in the historic district. And that gets sort of to Wayne's point as well, which is, I guess, can you walk us through how you believe those elements and others are reflective of guidelines and the nature of the historic district?
Well, the roof I agree with, the overhang, that I agree with. That's more of a modern touch. But as far as the windows go, as far as the stucco goes, as far as the metal roof goes, I don't agree. You know, your historic guidelines are not just for North Main Street, okay? They're for the whole village, okay? And just because this is a 5-square-mile village, okay, you can't say because it's on Gin Lane, it's different than North Main
Yes,
Street.
we can. They're
How?
separate and distinct historic
It
districts.
doesn't say that in the guidelines.
It's,
don't
it
mean to
names them
interrupt, but
in this book,
I
sir.
think there's a really important
A
principle
philosophical
that-
problem.
I think the challenge, perhaps for you as an applicant and for the board, this board combines two, at times, distinctly different functions. One is as design review, and the other is historic preservation.
Yes.
Those are two separate, and oftentimes municipalities have two separate boards, because those are two different sets of principles. And so whether you or any member of the board can evaluate your proposal on its aesthetics alone, the use of materials, et cetera, that's one discussion. The other is the appropriateness of this particular design in the middle of a historic district. And those are two entirely separate things. And I just want to point that out, that even though this design might find itself happily built somewhere else in the village where it is not competing with, next door to, across the street from, a historic district which is predominantly Victorian in terms of its construction period. The house that was taken down was a 4-square, it was dilapidated, but that's behind us now, but that was a very late house in that. And there's one, perhaps late 18th century period house in the neighborhood. But everything else in that relatively small and coherent historic district is Victorian. It dates from 1850 to 1890. And so I think the clash here is that this is just kind of very assertive. It's not the design is unpleasing, it's just that the industrial windows, the starkness of the stucco, the very modern overhanging, there's nothing essentially wrong with the design. I just feel that it's wrong for the historic district because it will clash. And one of the charges of the board, when it's wearing its historic preservation hat in the district, is to find what is compatible within that specific neighborhood. You know, not that aren't stuccoed houses down on the beach and all the rest of it. So that's really, I just felt that distinguishing that is important because I think we're combining two different discussions at the same time.
It is. And outside the historic district, the code is very clear about saying that we should try to avoid an excess of uniformity or dissimilarity.
Right.
And to Zach's point, if this were outside the historic district, I think I'd have a couple questions, but I'd find this quite pleasing. It's exactly this issue of, not that it needs to replicate what you did next door or the other houses, but it sends, there is an excess of dissimilarity here to the predominant look and feel of that portion of the historic district, in my opinion.
So you want a white shingled house with a porch? More,
We're not saying what we want, but we're saying that this
Necessarily,
doesn't.
look,
There's a lot of leeway in the Victorian
No,
era. You got 50 years to choose from.
Mike, just my comments. You know you introduced a modern home in a historic district, modern home, and so there are some licensing in allowing some design details that are a little bit more modern in the historic district, but this is a complete from top to bottom modern home that's being presented in the historic district. Every element, every feature of it, from its design to its roof lines, to the heighten of all the gables, to the material that's being used, to the fenestration, every bit of it is more of a modern home. And what is being trying to be at least relayed is that even though there is license for, it's not. I don't think there's an appropriateness for a home that's totally modern in the historic district in this region, and I think that's kind of
Right.
sort of what we're trying
And
to
the
do.
materials have
Not
no,
to say you can't have some elements,
no, I understand.
but it completely, I mean, your little stucco home, metal roof, you have the black, I like some of the detail, and I like some of the detail that you can probably play into a more traditional house. Not making it plain, not making it look like the neighbors. We're not asking you, this is not Mayberry, everyone's house has, cedar shingles, there's a white picket fence. No one's asking you to create that replica. What we're saying is that there's license to it, we just can't have a complete modern home in the historic district in this manner.
I understand that. The thing that I don't understand is when you go to the end of, oh God, There's a beautiful house they built across from the pond. It's a very modern house. It's on the ocean. They tore down an old house.
Town?
Yeah, that really nice house with the black, the shingles. It's beautiful. That is nowhere near something that was there. And that's what doesn't make any sense, because there are no different rules for the ocean than there are here. It's a historic
What
district.
about the Jaffe
There are
House?
different,
Is it-
No,
it's the Pep
it's brand
Boys.
new.
Oh, okay.
It's beautiful. It's a beautiful house, and I don't understand why there's a difference.
because they are different. Zach just told you. These,
There was never a modern house in that district, ever.
it's not that, it's made out of shingles.
Okay,
It
it's
has a
modern.
buildup, it
got
has a
black
FEMA
windows.
issue, all those houses.
But that's a good example.
And
What
it
we're
has
saying is
trim.
there's still,
some
there's
of
the
those.
traditional,
But
traditional
I didn't vote
material
for
that
it.
was used to build the house with some interpretation of modern elements.
Right.
You just want a complete modern.
There's a
direction.
postmodern house down on the west side of, is it Wyandanch, maybe? Or Little Plains, that's similar to that, which when you look at it, it's really, you can see the modern elements. It's got a glass railing on the back facing the ocean. But same, and it's got very small trim and very sort of tight, clean lines, more modernist lines. But again, forms, and you have forms here that are traditional forms, but traditional materials, all shingled. So just as, to underscore, I guess, what Curtis is saying, it's not that some of these elements don't work. It's that all of these elements in this case come across as very modern. in the
And they
historic
don't
district.
belong on that street. And the house next door that you completed and the landscaping, I think it's beautiful, and I think this house would completely detract from that. It's too different.
Right.
It's too aggressive.
Well, what I was
It
trying to
doesn't
do,
have to be the same, but it has to complement.
I was trying to make this look like a barn, because I wanted that.
It doesn't.
I wanted to look like kind
And
of
a building from the
Right.
old one.
Yeah, because I went to the ZBA to get a larger garage, because garage on that house looks ridiculous. You know, I wanted to get 20 feet, 22 feet, and they denied it.
I'll say this, Mike, I've seen your work. You know, you've been before this board for
You built
many
this
years.
somewhere
You've done, you know, we've gone back and forth. We've had some dialogue.
Well, maybe,
But your no, hear me out, because
But at the end of the day, we love it.
but the end result, what you've built, has been really, really nice. It really has.
Very
You've done
Thank you.
an incredible job on,
complements the street. It
especially the
looks
most,
like it
most of,
belongs there.
most of controversial applications we won't mention. Looks really nice. I drive by it every Saturday morning, and I'm like, wow, what a change. I can't remember what all the argument was about. This is different. This is different, and we know what you can do. It's just that you're bringing in something that we really think we want to like it, but it's not about our likes. It's about what's appropriate for that particular area.
well, maybe I could put this on Bishop's Lane. I have a lot.
Yes.
That'd be
Yeah.
fine.
All right. All right.
Can I just underscore one other thing? Because to me, it's important, just the more I look at this, and I know we've heard a lot of things, that 45-degree angle on the roof, to me, unless you're in, right in the heart of the village, in sort of cookie-cutter, side-by-side houses in a slightly more urbanized feeling area, having that kind of a steep roof in and of itself is a problem. Paradoxically, you could be on a dune on the end of Meadow Lane, and it might work there, but in this setting,
Are you talking about the gables or
just
the?
the angle, just the 45-degree, the 12/12 roof has an urban feel that I'd love, whatever you might come back with, to among other things, see a different angle on the roof.
All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to work on like a white house with a porch on it, more of a farmhouse then.
That
Can't wait to
sounds
see it.
I love the idea, I love the conceit of making this seem like it was part of something, developed somehow in conjunction with the house next door. I think that could be interesting.
Yeah, I was trying to make it look like it was part of one property.
Yeah.
All
So are
right,
you asking for an adjournment till our next meeting, Michael?
yes, please, I'll have some.
Motion to approve applicant's
Week.
request for 276 North Main Street
Thanks,
So moved.
thank
for an
you.
adjournment. Thank you.
Second.
Aye,
Thank you.
aye. And now the other person left. So let's talk about, could we just do it on the,
A real quickie
Yeah.
on the
so we
lady.
have an advice, Our Lady of Poland Roman Catholic Church asked that we consider landmarking them.
Right.
And Zach, I'd like you to tell
and-
me what you told.
Well, they already are. And I think Chris has precipitated this more of a discussion here, but it's understanding the code, your board can designate individual buildings for landmark purposes or districts. You have 4 districts. You have one instance of an individual building which is not within any of those boundaries, the so-called barber shop, which was landmarked individually. There's no other provision or mechanism in the code to do anything more or different from what you've already done. So in this case, this particular church, this building, is a contributing resource in the historic district. So you can't
Make
give
it
it an
more.
extra thing.
Right.
There's nothing.
It has a blue sheet, it's been identified, it's
Blue
been.
sheet.
Okay.
all of that.
So my impression, and I don't have any knowledge of this,
Yeah.
but we can talk to Chris, was that they either for reasons of civic pride, or,
Right, I think
parish
that's
pride,
motivating it.
or for possible grant money or other things,
Possibly.
they wanted some further acknowledgement of that. If
Right.
that's the issue, then we should look into it, but I'd be happy to sort of recommend that the building department write, or we as a board could write a letter to them just confirming the fact that they are already landmarked
Right.
and part of the historic district, because by virtue of being part of the historic
And
district.
what many people don't know is, as a contributing element among 400 buildings or as a freestanding, whatever, if it's about eligibility for grants, it's equal. There's no distinction between.
Okay,
I'm a
I don't
single-
It
think-
probably has to be
They probably
explained.
don't know.
I don't
Yeah,
think they
that's what it is.
understood that they
So
were
we-
already.
We'll ask council to draft a letter supporting the.
Maybe we can just call them up, because there's
They
nothing to
prob-
be done.
If it's a.
Probably want some
well,
documentation.
No, they need documentation.
I think part of the
especially-
confusion might be the published historic map, because I don't see it in this
Well, it's
published
in the
map.
boundaries. It's up on, what's the street?
Maple.
Maple Street.
It's on Maple.
Yeah. It's just below the railroad. Get yourself up to where's the railroad?
Right here.
Okay, so it's right down there. It's that square right there, or it's one of those two.
That's outside.
Oh, wait a minute, I'm sorry.
Is it?
I mean, that's the question now, that's.
On this map, it's not in, but I don't know if this is the right map.
There is a blue sheet on it, right?
Yes, there is, but
Doesn't necessarily mean it's in the district.
That's,
We have houses with inventory forms that were done in 1979, which didn't end up getting included in the district. Maybe I'm misspeaking here. Where's Railroad?
So
What we'll
it's
do is, we'll confirm whether it's in or
It's not
not.
up there. No, I'm sorry. It's
It's on that
I
little.
can't see it.
it's
Here.
in Layton in the train station. I
Yeah.
don't think it's historic district.
I don't think it is. But we'll confirm that, and then, if so, then if they're
Yeah, I'm
not,
sorry. I may have
direct them back for an
Yes.
application.
Well,
Absolutely.
they didn't come, so.
No, they wrote a letter, and I think the point would be is there'll be a
Sure.
formal
No, I may have
process to do so.
misread that.
Okay, so can you deal with
It definitely
that?
has a blue form, but that doesn't mean.
That it was,
Oh,
that's
okay.
included in the
No.
district.
So now what's the
Maybe.
next thing to do? You do?
It would have the formal, a formal
It'd
application.
be the same process of making an application to your board for recognition as a landmark.
Right.
Because it isn't presently. Just have to confirm that. I perhaps made the wrong assumption.
So-
I think the
Then
key,
they-
though, is you got a not-for-profit, you got a religious corporation owns the property. I'm sure they have counsel, and designating something a landmark in those particular, they need to
There
understand
is the,
all the conditions that come
inventory.
with it.
Sure.
I have the inventory.
Same inventory sheet doesn't mean it's in his.
But that doesn't mean,
Maybe on an inventory, but then the question is where they drew the boundaries. And that
Correct.
particular map I
I
looked
may
at, I
be
don't
wrong
believe
in
it's
that,
in, but I may not have the right map. So we'll confirm the boundaries, and if they're in the district, it's everything Zach said it was. However,
So
if they're
where-
not,
If not, they're
we can
eligible
entertain a
to do-
process
Absolutely.
in which
Direct them to
to
make a
do that, but
formal
make sure they understand what it
What
means. And two
Yes,
is
they
for
might wanna
them
know
to
what it
do,
means.
I'm sure they have all the homework, the historic
Okay.
aspects, so that we know exactly what the condition of the structure is going forward.
Yes.
before we get to the advisory pieces very quickly, this brings up a separate question, which is that our board is in fact tasked with, from time to time, recommending the landmarking of buildings or the expansion of the historic district.
Right.
And it's not something we've revisited recently, or the board has revisited recently. I believe it was 9 or 10 years ago when there was a proposed expansion over by the hospital, which was not adopted. And I just wonder whether we as a board want to go through any process, either through a subcommittee or by delegating or making a request to Zach, of some kind of audit or survey of the village to determine whether there are buildings like this church and others, maybe that have blue forms, maybe some that don't, that ought to be considered for landmark status. This comes up in part because there's been a demolition permit issued for a house. We don't need to go into specifics, but it's one that many people recognize as being historically important in the village, and meets, I believe, all 5 of the criteria for consideration for being designated by this board as outlined.
Is the issue.
No, but even without respect to the date, we have the criteria, the 5 criteria listed for which we can consider trying to designate something as a landmark, regardless of the date that it was built. All 5 of them are met by this particular property. It's architecturally significant. It was designed by someone of significance. It's visible and known to the public. I forget the other 2. One of them was that its historic personages have lived there. All of those 5 criteria are met. So, but we've not, and just not to point a finger at anyone, maybe myself as much as anyone, but to the extent there may be other properties like that in the village, I'd rather get ahead of considering designating those than be in the situation where this application comes in and we really, I think, have been advised by council that trying to designate at that point is trying to close those
Just to give
barn
you some
doors.
history behind the prior, we were given and issued a grant to do an inventory, which Zach did.
2004.
In 2004. And that was the initial stages for the recreation of the historic line, reestablishing a new historic line. It was not,
Well received.
Yes.
in a manner of speaking, not well received and not from a political
That's
aspect.
what happened.
It was not really requested to continue to move forward in doing so.
I'm sure you did.
I think that we've had examples now, and we have history now of lost, I would say, treasures, that it would have a better ear, and it will go over a lot better now. The question is, before doing that, I would want at least this board to have communications with the trustees to the direction we wish to go, because that blindsiding that next level could also cause some pushback. And I think the more that we can get all bodies on board and then come up with a plausible plan, open hearing, public hearing, having discussions, because they're going to be people who recently purchased their homes and going to want to know what that means in terms of value.
Yeah.
And the ability to make changes to their homes. And we're talking millions of dollars that people have spent because it wasn't in the historic
I'll
district.
tell you, I'm concerned more about some of the people who've owned their houses for a long time, who have had a lot of appreciation and want appreciation to be X rather than 0.6 or 0.9X. Because their house is now designated. I think that's actually as much or more of an issue. But my understanding is, for what it's worth, with respect to talking to the trustees, I believe the trustees have already had some either formal or at least informal discussion with the Planning Commission for them to go through various processes related to land use and to boards and to village code. Among them was getting a perspective from them on whether the historic district should be expanded. I don't know how far along that is. I don't know how formalized it is. The point is only that I think this is already on the radar screen of the trustees, I believe. But I think your
But
point about...
we have a freshman board, and I
Yes.
don't know, they may not know procedurally some of the things that as a board we can do. I'm not going to, I don't know.
Well, I can just tell you that what Rob has said is it has been on the board's radar, both this current board as well as the past. I think part of the question that would be helpful here is getting the expertise, because the concerns that you all raised about how and where and how you go about doing this and how it impacts landowners going forward is a specific concern. So the key would be getting that expertise to assist the village in identifying all these properties, their conditions, and how we can then add or otherwise modify the code to take them into account. So to the extent you do have any thoughts, collective or otherwise, I think it would be wise to pass them on to the Board of Trustees.
To give you a sense of scope, the inventory that we finished in 2004 took the number of the existing contributing is now about 450 properties in this main village district. That number went to about 800. So just visualize walking up Elm Street, for example. We'll just keep walking up the entire length. So I mean, the scope of this,
Louis
it's
Street.
not, Sag Harbor is going through this now.
Yes, they are.
And out of the entire village, they're looking at approximately 60 additional buildings. We'd be looking at, because they updated it once before. So we're taking a very old district from 86 that was inventoried based on 1979 buildings, and now we're looking 40 years later. So a lot of buildings now fall into the category of architecturally interesting from the 30s and the 40s. So it would be a big,
I also
It would be a
just
big thing,
wonder,
yes.
because we had this issue on Halsey, there was a house on Halsey that came before us, it was not in the historic district, it post-dated, I believe, 1928, 26. But it was a house with some history and an extant version of a four-square, and there was a similar request for a demolition permit, and the question was, did we want to consider landmarking? I think some of Bo's advice at that point was, you know, landmarking, designating something
Post-fact.
has its own challenges in any instance. Doing it in response to an application that's come in for a demolition permit is a little more difficult, it makes the climb steeper. So part of my question also is, in addition to expanding the historic district, are there, and that house, I don't think, while it was nice architecture, was not particularly distinct, there wasn't a famous architect or a resident, but in the cases, and maybe much more limited, where there is a famous architect, where it is very visible, where there has been an historic personage, and there may only be a handful of houses, is there any way to assess and evaluate those and consider naming a group of individual properties?
Yeah.
Maybe that's,
You have to do it
a provision in
individually,
the
though.
code to landmark something.
Yeah.
And importantly, and very unpopular, not diplomatic, is the fact that you don't need owner consent. Now, what situation would arise in which you would be comfortable,
Right.
you know, designating
gonna- it
something
would-
over
they'll be
another
huge.
objection? I
Well,
can't imagine.
just,
but
well,
I'm
we
just saying
always
that
know
the
there's a
code-
mechanism to challenge the authority
Yeah.
of any
Always.
decision we
Yes,
make.
of course.
So, I mean, I hear what you're saying, but it should
I'm
be
not
handled in
recommending
open
it, I'm just
forum,
saying
open
you've
public
got the-
forum.
Well, it has to
And
be.
allow the entire community to be able to voice their concerns.
Right,
And
absolutely.
we're not talking about 2 or 3 meetings,
Right,
we're
I
probably
know,
talking
understand.
3 or 4 months.
and part of the reason I bring this up is just because, to me, this issue of preservation, historic, landmark or not, and understanding those differences and what that entails, is at the root of some of the disputes, disagreements, and division that has taken place in the village particularly over the last couple of years on land use issues. And I think whether we come to the right resolution or not at the end of the day, having a forum for discussing it over these many meetings is at least a way of making sure people know their voices are heard and getting to some more public consensus over how much to consider expanding or designating, and what is the role of historic preservation in the life of the village. I feel like it's time, to me, it feels like it's time to at least have that dialogue again so that people get to a little more consensus.
I would feel comfortable if on the next election ballot, there is a
Referendum?
Yeah, absolutely. Why not? Allow it to be voiced publicly in an open forum, those that are voting bodies of our community, to at least, okay, well, there's interest. The numbers show based on interest, and then we can move on from there.
Why
I
would
think-
you take away the power we already have by doing that? We
It's
have the
just
power to do
advisory, you're
that.
talking about advisories.
Yes, and it has to go through a public process. That's what this is.
It will go through a proper process,
But I
but
mean- Okay, I don't agree with that one bit.
well, it'll be the day that this room is full and we have to go into the auditorium.
Well, every
What
time
we're
there
trying to
would be
do
a
is we're trying-
designation, there would be, it's like changing a law. It's the exact same process. There has to be public hearings, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So why would we change the process to have some more weird voting? That just is, we have laws. We should try to use
You're
them.
just saying to get the pulse of the community, whether it's
But what
pro or
pulse?
against the idea of expanding the district.
I
Yeah.
think
Oh,
that's terrible.
for the last
idea.
10 years, I've heard nothing but both sides of the pendulum. And each one of them were very passionate about their decision. You want, look, no one's been here, we've had meetings here, there have been
There are gonna be.
argumentative. You've never
They
been in
do it
a
one at a
meeting with
time.
this board where there's a whole stadium of people who are coming out against you. I think that we go through this, we go through it sensitively. Because there's
All right.
passion on both sides of the pendulum.
So going forward, as a constructive step, do we want to either ask Zach to do something that would consider, or
My
make a recommendation
suggestion
back to us?
is that, as, the first thing is always the facts and the circumstances, and what are the conditions, and how they are historic or architecturally significant to the village in the first instance. And part of that is the public input process, but more importantly is, what do we have now? What are the conditions? What's the inventory? Is no different than what was undertaken in 1979. That needs to be updated. We're 40, as Zach indicated, we're 40 years later. Things have changed, and
Right.
something that,
Well, people have come to me with suggestions.
so my point is,
You.
is that some of this is a little beyond our lay scope, and we need an expert or experts to assist us in producing that, because that is what's going to guide the village, number one, as to the inventory. And there are, as you know, other things that we need to address with our code and our guidelines that would help. So if you go and you designate another expansion of the historic district, it might be a different neighborhood. It's not going to be the North Main Street portion, which you're going to sit there, but it's going to have elements in there that you want to take further and identify, so that when you do get these applicants coming in, it's right there at your fingertips, and you can say, this street district was picked for these reasons, here's the examples, this is the kind of architectural style we're trying to mimic, whether it's new or additions or otherwise. So part of that, comes with the mere designation. And we know some of the elements, because the other part. So I have recommended to the board in the past that they move forward. The problem is that never got enough ground, and we now have a new board, and they're dealing with some other priorities. So it's going to take this board to make recommendations and also assist in how we can get to the next step, whether it be the planning commission creating a forum to do it with guidance. It's hard for this board because you're in the regulatory sense as well, to sit here.
But the
Doesn't the
code
law
does
tell
task
us?
us with it.
No,
but
I
agree, it's
understand that, but
awkward.
I'm saying it's
This is
hard
the law.
as you're sitting here, on one hand, trying to deal with applicants who may not be in that regulatory process, but you're having a mindset. What I'm saying is the forum is to participate in how this is there and provide whatever input you can in that process.
Right, but it is, if you read the code, we're the ones who are supposed to be bringing this up.
Making the recommendations.
Yes.
Yeah, there's no question.
I don't,
Yeah.
But I
Right.
think
Can I have a motion?
procedurally
I'm
is
tired.
to get the
Enough.
experts hired and get us going.
If we were to decide to pursue that, maybe just quickly, are there any budgetary issues? I mean, if we.
Of course.
Yeah.
So.
Gotta pay for it.
Who you going to pay to do all this
Right,
background
so
work
at
for
some
you?
point, do we not need
The village board.
the
Well,
board to
the certified,
approve?
the state, through the CLG program, paid for the survey update in 2004.
Yeah,
They're-
they can get
and they're
grants, but
constantly
then again, that's
contacting
Now, the problem with
the
that
village
is,
board
since
seeking
the
the
village
grants.
didn't act upon the,
update,
and now it's 15 years old. If it were 5 years on the shelf, it would still be valid. 10, now we're 15 years out from that. And even though it might essentially reflect what would be reasonable, and it still is falling a little short of what we could consider current, we could dig that off. We have a printout of that. It never went online because the village was changing its platform, whatever the hell they call this stuff. It never got put up, for general distribution. But we have a printout of it. The building department.
all right,
Would it be a burden if we as a board asked you to just do a quick outline of what an update process might look like, what steps would need to be taken to inventory, and
We might have to
maybe-
look to a different source of revenue if it becomes a project, because I don't think the state is
oh, not
gonna
in a good
be-
place.
yeah, they would be thrilled to hear that it's happening. I don't say that they wouldn't fund it, but it's very competitive to get those grants, and we already got one, and we didn't do anything with it. So I don't think going back to them 15 years later for the same thing is going to be a
So,
compelling
would we just
request
say
for
mea
their
culpa?
money.
Well, they
Could
might
we
have
just
forgotten.
fess up?
They might have forgotten. I'm not reminding them.
All right, I'm
Okay.
Okay,
motion to
good idea,
close the
though.
meeting of the Board of Architectural Review, and, we had, these two other agenda items are
Yes.
both adjourned.
They were both adjourned.
The advisory.
Yes.
opinions. Okay. So I'll make a motion that we adjourn this meeting of the Board of Architectural Review and Historic Preservation for September 23rd, 2019.
A second.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.